And welcome to Game Master's Guide. I'm Jonathan Albin, your host, also known as Game Master J, and today we're going to be talking about where have all the heroes gone, why have they disappeared from the tabletops across the country, and what has led to the downfall of role-play games in terms of popularity. I know that's a controversial point, but I think if you follow me through, you'll see that I'm right on this subject. Now, this is one of the trending topics that you haven't found within the Talking Heads sphere yet, but it will be talked about soon. So remember that you heard it here first. Make sure you go down below and click all the buttons to let the algorithm know you're part of our audience, and let's get started.
Absorbing damage is the name of the game. From the claws of monsters or the heat from a ball of flame, or strength in numbers is a roll of the die.
Alrighty, so first of all, I want to apologize for the excessive amount of noise on the signal tonight. We are having a bit of a heat wave, and I have a central fan running on the other side of the room, but I fear you might be able to pick that up, so I hope it won't be too much of a burden. Today we're going to be talking about the state of the games industry in a slightly different way than we have before. Don't I say that all the time? But today I'm going to be addressing this as a game master, and hence I put my name Game Master J here for reminder. As I get started running live streams again in the near future, you'll be able to see that. But anyway, so before we go to the particulars, let's talk about what heroes are. So what's a hero? Well, if we look at the Webster's definition of a hero is fundamentally the person that runs towards danger when everyone else is running away from it. The hero is the person who does the great thing and gets the accolades for that accomplishment, whether they feel they deserve it or not. And a hero is additionally something that is generally considered to be a character trait. So if you are heroic, you will be a hero regardless of the environment that you find yourself in. And so today we're going to be talking about the reality of the role-play environment and how it has shifted over the last 50 years. Now, as a GM who ran consistent stories throughout the periods, I've seen heroes rise and fall culturally as well as individually. And I have to say that I'm rather appalled at the way in which current environments represent the heroic. And we have substantially watched heroism as a trait fall by the wayside and be poo-pooed and cast out as a desirable feat, a desirable trait. Now, let's go back and look a little bit at the past. When we talk about heroes, when we look towards the past, we can look for specific names of heroic characters and the people who played them. And I think you'll see some correlations. John Chisholm is considered to be a hero of history. You could look at the Pinkertons. You could look at a wide array of historical figures through the 1860s into the 1920s, 1940s. You've got characters like Audie Murphy and Lieutenant York, and many of the World War II characters have become heroic in their portrayed positions, mainly because we picked big, strong actors, very tough individuals to play them. If we are going to go back into ancient times, we're looking at characters like Agamemnon or Theseus, Perseus, and the like. And so heroes were almost always portrayed as implacable, as stalwart, determined in their course, and willing to do whatever it would take to win in the situation. And these portrayals became, in many ways, the hoped for outcome of players playing games. In other words, when I was a kid and you were playing, for example, in Planet of the Apes, and you were playing through a fictional setting of that as a kid, just running around in the streets being silly, you certainly looked up to Cornelius, you looked up to Zira, Colonels, Dr. Zaius, and the like, because these were characters who carried this heroic demeanor. They were set up so that they would have a serious directional course from which they were unswerving. There was never a question about them. So heroes in the past were portrayed in ways that would elevate their value to the younger folk. Now, a lot of this has to do with the fact that television, radio programming was also trying to carry on a message for Americans to see these traits of heroism as a positive thing, these statuses to be something that was going to allow the individual to be more than perhaps they expected to. Now, the purpose of a hero, therefore, becomes important, because if you are looking to your heroes as exemplars, then you're looking for the players in your games to also take on that role. And the idea of this purpose in literature, in theater, in motion pictures, at least early on, was really to cement the concept of the heroes as the stalwarts. If we looked at individuals from the past, they were always cast in that same heroic light, whether it be Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. The founding fathers were elevated because they were also given this heroic veneer. They were placed where they were within the culture because they fulfilled those roles in the stories that were being told. And directors were telling stories. They weren't developing character studies. This started to change in the mid-60s, early 70s into the 80s, when we started to sort of deconstruct the heroic angles of people. And there are certain characteristics we're going to talk about that develop within the heroic venue that sort of started to take apart the very concepts of heroism that had been put on display in those earlier period pieces. Now, when we looked at the characters of the ancient past who were heroic, were they indestructible? Well, for the portion of the story that they were important, they were not. However, the question started to become, what do we know about these people and how can we make them more relatable? And I think this is where the problems sort of begin for game masters, because if you are trying to build your story up so that your players will be heroic, you're not wanting to draw in their humanity. You're not drawing in their very nature. You're trying to build up the story. And I think this is perhaps where the very value of role-playing begins to decline. Because when we look to the destructible, when we look to the broken nature with which people can be found, we soon find that brokenness is everywhere, and in all cases, individuals are fallible. Now, again, to the point, when you are building up a story for the purpose of educating and elevating individuals, you will build up the concept of how devoted they were, how pious, how pure they were in their concept. And this radically changed, especially in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, because suddenly we're looking at characters not for their devotion, but rather for where they are broken and where we are most like them. And when we do this, when we undermine the concept, these higher virtues of heroism, and we replace them with discovering the humanity and identity of the individuals, we eliminate the very value of heroes altogether. And we certainly saw that in that period of time with movies like Easy Rider and others, wherein the heroes of the story are fundamentally, pointlessly eliminated, or perhaps they were heroes on the wrong side of a conflict. And when we undo the heroes, we set ourselves up for no longer having anybody to ascribe to. Now, I also believe that there's a element of this that has to do with a strident attempt to undermine a religious basis from the world of Earth to get us to see that people are fallible and people will break. There was, for example, in the I believe it was in the late 80s, early 90s. I mean, you probably find me wrong here on this one, but The Last Temptation of Christ was ultimately created as a film to try to take down the most vaunted, if you will, heroic character of all time. Because if you could find a temptation of Christ that causes his faltering or causes him to fail, then you have undermined all of the great heroes of the past and put them to shame. The idea here is that when we are trying as storytellers to tell these grand and great stories with that level of heroism, it becomes unrealistic in the eyes of the majority of players. And I think this is where I perhaps run afoul of even some of my audience who actually think that the role play of the dynamic. Thanks for Juki. I appreciate that comment. And Jesus Christ Superstar as a storytelling is an amazing piece of work because it is a fiction. The Last Temptation of Christ was actually arguing whether or not he had a level of sensuality that isn't found in Scripture, and therefore it had a lot of problems. As a matter of fact, it was panned horribly by religious figures as being completely irrelevant and downright crude. That wasn't the case of everyone, but that was the basis for them. No, and that's fine, Juki. You'll find that I'm much more of a conversationalist than a monographer. I don't mind speaking directly, but I also prefer the conversation. And that's true. That's true. So the challenge with the undermining of heroism, though, is that it is fundamentally the opposite of what role-playing, at least in its infancy, was. Now, I have had people who go back and forth on what Gygax was doing or what Tolkien was doing before role-play came about. And the basis of storytelling, as I perceive it at least, has always been to be an elevating exercise, to bring the characters, bring the personas to a higher level of understanding, a comprehension of their heroism even as they did it. Now, there are players who feel like that's railroading or establishing something for the players that's not necessarily in evidence. But the reason why there's a problem with Christ in the 1970s was actually a newspaper heading in the 60s that said God is dead. And if you haven't seen that article, that's yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. The issue of heroism in the player basis, though, really is what are the players trying to attain. And in the early days of role-playing, when Gygax and Arneson were feuding and the beginning of the problems within the marketplace, the very elements that led to games being sort of in a heroic vein were starting to falter, and new publishers were stepping into the box, so to speak, and were bringing us properties that dealt with other issues. I think you'll see more about that as we change topics here. No worries. If we get any controversy going anywhere, we're at a good point, I think, unfortunately. So the real trick here is what one characteristics, if you're going to look at all of the heroes of time, whether you're talking Perseus or Theseus, Agamemnon, Jesus, what one characteristic did they all have prior to the 1990s that has been completely deconstructed since then? And I could give you a few seconds, but I'm kind of excited about the possibility. Oh, sure. Go ahead and share your favorite characteristic. I'd love to hear this. Which one characteristic do you find in RPGs that you would like to refer to? Drum roll, please. Well, when it comes to role-playing in general, if you're looking at, and I'm also speaking in terms of storytelling outside of RPGs, because when I started back in the 70s, there were only a few of us. We weren't yet a juggernaut, and it wasn't until the early 80s that you ended up with the Satanic Panic and all of that started. So in all storytelling, prior to the 1980s, actually 1990s, what was the one characteristic? Okay, now that's interesting. Plot armor is it would be a good guess. Plot armor is a way of doing what I'm talking about. Right. So if you're looking at the superheroes of history, well, they couldn't die, but the reality was they did. Like, for example, if you took biblical heroes, you've got the leaders of the 12 tribes, and they are vaunted and elevated and given reign over certain parts of the world, and yet in one case at least, one of them claimed that a street-walking fundamental prostitute was more holy than he was, because those characters, 10 of those disappeared. You have to give me better context on that. But the point I'm referring to is that the one characteristic that all production, all narrative versions of heroes throughout time up until the 90s was their oh, I see what you're talking about. The point I was making about them was though that they were elevated so that their names are known this far down past it. The characteristic that all heroes had before the 1990s was respect. And that is the persons that told the tales. No worry, and I'm Jonathan, Game Master J. Anything you want to call me. I'm definitely not a holy host, but I'm the only host. So there you go. Wow. Okay, so the concept, though, was that when you told a story about a champion or a hero, there was an automatic level of respect provided that champion. And in the 1990s, that works too. The concept that a hero would be challenged on levels of respect was unheard of. When you all of a sudden start to say, well, what if we look at that character in a different light, and perhaps we'll see that he isn't as shining an individual, or perhaps we're going to look for alternate sources for information on a particular heroic figure. Maybe we won't like them as much. And the problem with that from a storytelling standpoint is that if you're not able to elevate or hold these people to a higher esteem, then there is no place for we as characters, we as individuals in a story, to attain anything similarly to it. So that challenge of not having the characteristic of respect really did lead to what I consider to be the downfall of role-playing games in general. And that is to say, for example, the concept of religion in role-play. Yes, they had certain other deities that you had to deal with. You had to acknowledge different cultural mores than you might if you were in a hard and fast Christian environment. But as a game master storyteller, dealing with kids, dealing with players who were in those established structures, when you start challenging whether or not the characters to which they are comparing themselves are good or evil, you undermine the very process that the role-playing game was kind of devised for. Okay. Is it that I want players to be talked about as myths? I want them to see themselves in that light. They are reaching. Now, in my case, the campaign arc is a 7-year story that restarts, and I've been retelling it over and again since 1970. So we are currently in the 9th iteration. And so the champions of the ancient past that the players discover in their encounters are, if you will, heroic. The only stories that remain are the good parts of their arcs, because the elevated ones, those who became, if you will, the avatars of the past, were those that had the heroic virtues. So the real element is that I used to have players that would ask to play an evil character, or they wanted to follow an evil arc, and admittedly so, they would say, I want to be the bad guy. And my point is that if I'm holding the past heroes to the fire of being good, then the new player coming in who wants to play evil sets himself in opposition to that situation. In my honest opinion, is there any PCs that I have crossed over from heroic legends towards demigods? That's a really good point, and the answer to the question is yes. As a matter of fact, the longer I GM, the more I realize that the players are going to establish for themselves what they perceive to be their future. You have to realize that in the early days when I was a GM at 11, 12, 13, 15, 19, I was traveling and moving a lot. I went to 22 different grade schools across 11 different states. I went to 6 different high schools, and then I was in the military. And with all those moves and transitions, the groups were in constant flux, constant change. So I didn't have the benefit of long-form players. Now, in my advancing years, as I get older, my players tend to stick around. I've got one young lady who is 80, who has been playing in my campaign for 12 years. And she actually did follow the line you're asking about and chose to dedicate herself to becoming deity. She actually is now, Miri is one of the very few actual gods of the world of Nycos. So she is the goddess of life and light. She also is the head of one of the larger religious organizations that actually doesn't follow her personal beliefs. So there's more to the story than you'll ever can know. But yes, it has happened that the players elevate themselves to the point of deity. And even if that's the case, then the issue becomes, are they pure enough? Are they proper enough? Are they of that moral character, as we're talking about, that would be worthy of that respect? And so, yes, there are players that certainly have Because, after all, it's a fictional setting. It's a fantasy world, and therefore even their fantasies can be pure and innocent and sweet and not be clouded with the day-to-day darkness that is our reality. And I think that may be one of the reasons why I refer to the death of heroes in role-play games. Well, the reason why this concept of respect is absolutely important is that if you have respect, then you also have a element of forgiveness to your approach. I have looked for a single word to describe it, and I failed. The term I come closest to is the idea of benefit of the doubt. The idea is that when a person is being elevated or being raised up in the eyes of others in terms of their heroic nature and the wonderful things that they've done and the major benefits and the destruction of certain monsters and such, these all have to be taken with a grain of salt, because there is, of course, a chance that the player did something unethical, immoral, or fattening along the way. And if that's the case, then you have to have given granted a dose of benefit of the doubt to that individual. And I think this is what's missing in role-play games today, and why the number of new properties that come out keeps ramping up, but the number of new players that actually start because of that new product goes down and down, because the idea of relegating to someone else the benefit of the doubt is so far away removed from our culture that it's difficult for us as individuals to provide it or ascribe it to anybody, and particularly to ourselves. Okay, good. So the question would be, what would be the reward? Well, the reward, first of all, is that since the world of Nykos is an ongoing campaign and has been for 50 real-time years, that's 12,800 years of actual playtime. And there are characters who are still known by name from the third iteration, the fourth iteration, and so on, because of the great deeds they did and the stories that are still told about them. The very thing that players love to do within campaign, when they go, remember the time we did the thus and such and we killed the monster with the thing? That storytelling element now is reworked and postured forward to become the relics or the lore of the story of those characters. Right. So that's the primary methodology for carrying on the heroic stories, the myths, if you will. The second line, of course, would be what you referred to in terms of deity. And there's a third rail within the world of Nykos, and that is because of the nature of the universe, the gods are way too busy to answer every individual player's prayer, so to speak. And so the players merely hope they gain enough attention of the gods so that the gods will come and pay attention to them, at which case those heroic personas of the characters from the ages past then reveal themselves as avatars. And that is sort of that third rail, that the idea of your character's advancement may not have gone so far that you decided to build up a faith, you really didn't care anything about that, but you were still a good enough person, for example, for the treaty that you negotiated between the Eldrin and the Rook so long ago now makes you a critical player in that conflict, even in these times. And so therefore the players get an opportunity to engage with the personalities and the mechanisms of the players that have been once in the game. Now granted, those players have most often gone on to other things and have not reprised their role, but I do have a couple of players who actually have reprised their roles, and therefore they are now in the modern iteration as the shadow of themselves from before. Exactly. Exactly, and it's more like they're the social workers that avoid the bureaucracy. They show up and say, "Well, I want something to be done, and the system isn't resolving fast enough, so we're going to step forward and act as emissaries to these individuals, and therefore convey the messages we want." Now, the biggest question, though, is how did we come to where we are right now? And we are in a situation where, by description, by the way the media plays it, role-playing games are more popular than ever. That there are more people involved in the role-play business and in the games marketplace than ever before. And yet, even major companies like Wizards of the Coast have had rather dismal sales numbers of late. And the question is, how did we come here? And here's the secret most people don't want to acknowledge. The fact that the majority of the awareness of Dungeons and Dragons today come from shows like Critical Role or the different role-play groups that are of that same ilk, or perhaps the references in TV programs like Community, or more recently in Big Bang Theory, and even the admission of some big actors and personalities that recognize and acknowledge the value of role-playing games. This has all raised the heightened awareness. But here's where the rubber doesn't quite meet the road, and most people aren't really aware of it. Recently, well, as recently as 10 years ago, I did some experimentation in terms of running games events at what normally tended to be more voyeuristic audiences. So, for example, I went and ran a series of role-play game scenarios in the Star Trek environment at Star Trek conventions. And these were specifically those that were targeted to the actors, the set makers, the creatives behind it, and such like. What I found is that the extremely vast majority would acknowledge a role-play game and say, "Oh, that's interesting," and tell you how great they would be at it, and yet when it came down to rubber meets the road, they would not play. And I think that's what's going on in our culture today. I think this is what our talking heads of the games business are going to be addressing in the near future, is the fact that we've had this false dichotomy of what everyone perceived to be a growing audience and yet a reduction in sales. And the reality is that we started killing off the heroes at some time in the past. And this proclivity for undermining and undoing the work of people that we should be holding to a higher expectation has instead left us in a place where we're missing the value, and players can't be heroic because heroes are just like everybody else. They still put on their pants the same way. They still cry when they get their arm broken. The concept of how we got here is that we have undermined and underdeveloped this expectation, and we have not held our heroes to the level of respect. Now, a great example, and this one will probably get something thrown at me from someplace, but the concept, for example, of our current president and the challenges that he's faced along his way, we certainly can chalk some of it up to he's a wealthy man, he has a lot of associates that have lots of money and all of that, but someone did fire a weapon at him and nearly killed him. He immediately stood up, raised his fist, and said, "Fight, fight, fight." That's a hero. That's what heroes do. He didn't step back. He didn't let the crowd cover him up. He stood up and raised his arm. Now, whether that was done as part of theater, I don't care. The point that I'm trying to make is that the level that we expect our champions to step beyond the weaknesses that they have should be such that we can give them a pass for the small peccadillos. And that I'm not giving any ground for impropriety towards females or anything. simply saying that the idea of a hero in our culture has been undermined so badly. Even those people that were held to high esteem just a year or 2 or 3 years ago now are being dragged into the mire and the muck and the mud and undermined. And while some of it is certainly warranted, all of it isn't. And we have to find ways to tell the stories that are heroic in nature so that our players can become as a friend of mine used to say, I want to be the me I want to be. I refuse to be a less than superior version of myself. I'm going to step forward and I'm going to be better than this. And we have to get so we do that as well. Now, the biggest high cost of disrespect is that there is no level playing field any longer. There is no sacred cows. There's no single elevatable figure. The fact that Mel Gibson made the final version of The Passion of the Christ, and it was so devastating that people actually tried to ban it or limit its viewing. And then they turned around and attacked it because of his own personal peccadillos, is a point of they disrespect him and therefore disrespect his work. And the point I'm trying to make is that the highest cost of disrespect is we no longer have the capacity to hold people to a higher esteem. Seriously, which part? The idea that a hero will rise is constantly being undermined, whether it be by agency overtaking his ability to have done it himself, or whether you're talking about the person who had the capacity to get additional income because of people he knows rather than the work that he would have done. No, I agree with you. But it was actually banned in several theaters when it was first launched because of its violence, and the portrayal of Satan, for example, was an area where that was. Yes, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. That's why I brought up the movie in particular, because that movie, Passion of the Christ, was elevating. It was showing what cruelty men could do to other men that was beyond the comprehension that we would have. And that really, in a lot of ways, was the last movie of its kind. Because, well, I think if you go back and look, I'll have to do some research and I'll put it down in the comments below on the YouTube channel video. But I do believe, yes, the movie was castigated because of the reality of the violence and the extent of it. They felt it was over the top in terms of the quote, destruction of the Christ. The point here is that we have to get past this. We need to get to where it's okay to tell the story. For example, a great example I can think of is the concept of Johnny Appleseed. Johnny Appleseed was an individual. There was a guy that went around planting apples. That's true. Was he the folk tale hero that he became due to the advertising promotions of the apple companies? No, he was just a guy. But the story about him became more than that. And that's true. And I don't disagree with you. One thing I think that if you look at his history, if you look at Mel Gibson's history and the movies that he was in early on, like The Road Warrior, opened him up to a level of violence that other directors were gun shy about. And I think also there is an issue of I could tear down as well as the best of them. I could take Mel Gibson apart, because there was a lot of stuff that he did that would be wrong. The stuff he said that was anti-Semitic when he was drunk, and the fact that he was caught in public being drunk, and all of the yes. But the point is that we're missing out on the greatness of films like his if we color it with the drudgery and lowness of his own personal culture class. Having said that, I believe there's a simple solution, and that is for storytellers to go about telling the stories that give that heroic aspect back to the players without the desire to undercut or dredge out the muddiness of reality. There are game masters who will, and there are a lot of players who want to play in role-play environments that are gritty, dirty, and real, and that's okay. But what I'm referring to is that if we want to solve this problem of our culture's collapse in this light, if we want there to be more people playing role-play games, we need to reinvest in the idea of creating a positive message and a positive and forward style of play that gives players the chance to be better. Yes, I agree with you. And you're exactly right that was fundamentally what that was a passion play drawn out to give a visualization for something that no one of us could see. So yes, I agree with you. The duty, therefore, of a game master is to hold the line and not don't denigrate the heroes that you build in your stories. Don't give them the opportunity to be less than the high point that they once were. The players will do their work of making sure that they are brought down. And we have the duty and the obligation to be the harbingers of a greater place, a better world. And whether that includes the obvious and strident necessity in many worlds for that's funny. If we don't hold the line, then what I fear is that we will be stuck with a lot of mediocre and fundamentally undirected storyline frames that are going to lead players into potential points of depression and lack of direction. And why was Satan there in the movie? I believe, this is wholly off the top of my head, that the concept of the opposing one, Satan, in the story of the Christ was so essential that you had to clearly define him. And once you've defined him, in order for the glory of Christ to be elevated to the esteemed level that he was desiring, you had to bring the devil low. And so therefore that ending, that passing, was simply to get him out of the story without because he was actually defeated. Most people don't realize that the death of Christ was also the death, if you will, of Satan, of the opposer, because we were elevated to the right hand and the equivalent of Christ through Christ. So yeah, so that was the reason why they took him down in order to elevate. It's a contrivance, certainly. But again, this video wasn't about a particular film, but I do appreciate all the comments. Don't get me wrong, Juki, this has been great. Now, finally, we got our parting shots, and that is, I've gone around it, I mentioned it before, but the concept of the benefit of the doubt is essential to keeping the player's level of respect high enough for their heroes, champions, and legends within the game. If you have already elevated them, how do you keep your players in line with that story? How do you keep them seeing the villain or the hero? Oh, I think we might do that. We might do what do they call those? Jonathan Reacts. I haven't watched Superstar in 20 years, 25 years. Back when it was out, that was a while ago. I know that it's still out from time to time, but maybe I will have to do a Jonathan Albin Reacts video. Actually, I may do that if I have other people comment on it. I could do reacts on a lot of what I consider to be great role-playing movies and talk about how they've influenced role-play across the board. So, therefore, what it comes down to is what do you do in your games to provide your champions with the benefit of the doubt? Are there places where the players can dig into their dark, dirty pasts? And if so, how do you overcome them? I'd love to hear that part. And I will be catching you guys in the next episode. I do record daily at around 11 p.m. So this has been one of my longer episodes. I want to thank you so much, Juki, for being here and adding your commentary. Thank you to everyone else for being here. Like, subscribe, follow the channel, and share this. For goodness sake, share this with other people, because I like to get the word out. I do believe there are a lot of people in the games business, the professional talking heads, that really need to be addressing this topic as well. You guys have a great night, and I'll see you in the next one.